and welcome to More Than Clothes with me, your host, Sarah Ryan. In this podcast, we'll explore the connection between style, identity, confidence, and mindset, and why getting dressed is never just about clothes. Today, I want to discuss the idea of clothes as a form of communication. So if you have ever had an event coming up and you thought, oh, what am I going to wear to this thing? And you tried something on and you took it off and you tried something else on. Before you know it, the clothes are everywhere and you're fed up and you're like, I'll go shopping. That's what I'll do. That's the solution. Maybe you've been in that situation where you've just overthought what you were going to wear for that particular occasion. And one of the reasons I'm guessing that you did that was you maybe wanted to make a good impression. You wanted to dress appropriately for the occasion and you wanted to feel good about yourself. Now, you might also be on the other side of the spectrum where you say, do you know what? I don't care about clothes. I don't care what people think about me. And that's great. There's a lot of freedom in that comes with that as well. But the thing is about what you're wearing is whether you care deeply about what you're communicating or whether you couldn't give a hoot about what you're wearing and what it's communicating and what people think. That is kind of irrelevant because whether you like it or not, people are making assumptions. It may not be fair, but that's what they do. I'm going to explain why that is and get into it today. So I want to start with a little experiment that I did at a talk I gave a few weeks ago. The title of the talk was The Psychology of Personal Style. So how we dress influences communication, behaviors. And it was a fascinating event, even if I do say so myself, because I did this experiment. What I did was I showed the audience an image of 3 different people. There was no biography, no explanation, no context, no background information, simply just photographs. And I picked one of the pictures. I said, okay, let's talk about this lady here. We don't know much about her. Really, we only kind of have a head, shoulders down to the waist level kind of shot of her style. But it was enough for the group to have a really good guess, not just about her style, but about her entire life. I asked the group about what might her values be, what's important to this person. I asked them what music she listens to. They were able to answer that. I asked them what her political views might be. They were able to answer that. So whether was she, liberal or conservative, they were able to answer that. I asked what food do you think she eats? What her hobbies were? What do you think her personality is like? Maybe what job or career she has. And it always fascinates me, not necessarily surprised me, but how quickly the group came up with these answers. And not only that, but they came up with unanimous answers. There was about 20 people in the room that day. And every one of them were able to answer unanimously about these various areas of her life simply by this photograph. Nobody needed instructions. Nobody needed encouragement. The assumptions appeared automatically. And today I want to talk about why that happens. As I say, whether we like it or not, our clothes are speaking for us long before we get an opportunity to open our mouths, introduce ourselves, explain who we are. Words are secondary. Why is this? Well, as humans, we are meaning-making machines. If you think about it, if you ever kind of got a text from somebody, maybe you were dating, early days dating, and they wrote something and you thought, oh, what does that mean? And you started kind of going, oh, maybe it means this and maybe it means that. And you really read into it. We love to put meaning on things. I think I mentioned in the last episode, I was at a training seminar and the person delivering it showed us this video of these little kind of dots moving around the screen, and it appeared that one of the dots became kind of almost ostracized from the group. And we all start feeling sorry for this little dot that was ostracized. And he asked the group, what's happening here? And we said, well, one is being left out. They're being bullied. And he said, no, there are dots moving around the screen. But as humans, we wanted to make sense of this. We wanted to put meaning on this. We can't help ourselves. Our brains are constantly looking for clues around us. We scan our environment and we're thinking, who's this person? Can I trust them? Are they like me? Could I belong to that group of people? Are they my tribe? What matters to them? I wonder if it's the same thing that matters to me. That could create a connection. And for thousands of years, making quick judgments helped us survive. Why is that? Because thousands of years, we were in very different environments. We didn't have the safety and shelter that most of us have the privilege of having these days. We were not top of the food chain. We were probably in the middle somewhere. And so there were threats all around us. We could have been eaten by wild animals. So to step out into the environment, we had to scan the environment for clues, for information, for threats. It was a matter of life or death, how quickly we could make sense of our environment. And while we've come a long way in terms of technology and we think we're really evolved, we know from evolution happens slower than a snail's pace. And our brains haven't changed that much since way back then when we were out hunting for food. So therefore, our brains are still thinking, I need to make sense of this situation. Is there a threat here? Is this person somebody I could get on with, help my survival? That's how our brains are operating still. And that is why we make judgments about people's clothing or about the person themselves before we even get a chance to get to know them. It's not out of being malicious. It is simply the way our brains operate today because that's what they did thousands of years ago. The difference is now we're making those judgments in coffee shops and offices and networking events and supermarket queues and just walking down the street. But clothing provides some of the quickest clues available. Another experiment I did with that same group, just to demonstrate my point that visual clues are far more important than the spoken word or the written word. What I did was I put a list of countries up on the screen, and there was probably, 50 or 60 countries just written. And I asked them to find Ireland. And put your hand up when you found Ireland. So bit by bit, it took a few seconds and people started to raise their hand, and eventually the whole classroom had raised their hand. I said, okay, we're going to do that very same experiment again, but with a visual cue. So I went to the next page on the screen. This time they were the flags of the countries. And when I asked them to find Ireland, they put their hands up far quicker than they did when they were searching for words because they recognized that visual cue. Now, of course, in this experiment, they would have to be familiar with the visual cue, the flag of Ireland, in which case I knew this group would be. It just goes to show that we process images far quicker than the written word, or even if somebody's speaking at us. I think a lot of people believe that communication starts when they begin talking. And of course, it doesn't. We know that now because we know that image is such a strong thing. Might be the case if you're on the phone, but if we're talking about in person where we have those visual cues, that is the thing that matters most. Communication starts the moment somebody sees you. And studies show that first impressions can be formed within 0.7 seconds, a fraction of a second. So think about it. If you're maybe walking up on stage to give a talk, or you're going to an interview or a date, opinions have been formed long before you get to speak. And don't forget, they're making assumptions about your values, what's important to you, what music you listen to. Is this a person I can get on with? So it goes far deeper than we might realize. You don't get the chance to sell yourself by telling your story or telling them about your experiences, your career history. You don't get that opportunity first. People have already started creating a story about you. And it isn't good or bad, it's human. So it's not really a useful thing to wonder, oh gosh, are people making assumptions? You can assume people are making assumptions. The better question is whether your appearance is helping tell the story you want told, because that is in your control. Let's do a little bit of reverse engineering here. I'm going to read out some words, and maybe you'll visualize as I say the words what that looks like in an outfit, in an item of clothing, in what someone's wearing. So because this is an audio medium, we're going to do it the opposite way, but see how quickly you come up with images. So what comes to mind when I say professionalism, creativity, authority, warmth, approachability, tradition, rebellion, status, confidence, attention to detail, adventure, playfulness, sophistication. Now, none of these qualities are contained within the clothes themselves, yet we consistently associate certain visual signals with certain characteristics. Now, did you come up with images as I read those words about what that looks like? That's why things like uniforms work. I remember working for an airline, and when we wore that uniform and we walked through the airports as a group of cabin crew together, I always remember how people stopped and they would take out their phones and take a video or a picture, because the overall impression, because I've seen it myself when I see crew walking through the airport, it's one of authority. They convey safety, professionalism, elegance. These uniforms were conveying a message to those people. And it was incredibly important because, a lot of people would be scared of flying, and, they're looking to their crew for reassurance. It's also why luxury branding works, and why brands and companies will spend millions on getting their branding right. That's why first impressions work. Human beings naturally attach meaning to visual information. Now, the thing is, this can make some people a little uncomfortable because it sounds It sounds really superficial, doesn't it? Like we're judging people based on what they're wearing, how they're dressed. And, we all say, oh, we shouldn't judge people, don't judge a book by its cover. Or you might be that person who says, well, I don't care what people think. I don't really care about clothes. And I get that response. I have heard that from clients, but it misses something really important. The fact that you don't like something, you don't like the fact that people are judging, it doesn't stop it happening. It'd be great if it did, but it doesn't stop it happening. People are making assumptions whether we approve of the process or not. Pretending it doesn't happen doesn't stop it, and it doesn't give us freedom. But understanding it does. Now, you might be thinking, well, Sarah, assumptions are one thing, but assumptions are not facts. And you're absolutely right. Just because somebody assumes something doesn't make it true. Going back to that experiment that I did where I showed the group of people an image of a woman and they were able to talk about her values, her habits, her food, her music. Now, had we had a chance to speak to this lady, maybe we got it all wrong. The audience at my talk had no idea whether their guesses were accurate. And that's worth noting. That's important because style communication isn't about controlling what everyone thinks. That's impossible. Forget that. We don't have that mind control. The world would be a very different place if we had mind control. That's not what we're doing here. But it is about increasing the likelihood that your external appearance aligns with your internal identity. That's the important thing. It's important to recognize the difference between the influence that we have and the control that we don't have. And take this as an example. So let's say you want to win the lotto. Can you control that? Absolutely not. You have no control over the outcome of that. Can you influence the situation? Yes, you can influence the situation by buying a ticket and being in the draw. You still don't have control over the outcome. Influence and control, two very different things. This is where I'd love for you to become curious, if you're not curious already. I don't want you to be judgmental, just curious. But ask yourself, if somebody met me today, what might they assume about me? Okay, you don't have an opportunity to talk. You don't know this person. They simply see a visual representation of you. Okay, remember not to be judgmental here, just curious. Would they assume that you're creative, professional, approachable, confident, traditional, maybe adventurous? And then ask yourself, are those assumptions actually aligned with who I am? Now, there might be a gap here. And psychologists call this self-congruity, which means how closely a person's clothing reflects their identity, values, personality, or the image they want to project to others. So do you have self-congruity, or is there a gap? And this is one of the biggest reasons why people feel disconnected from their style. They feel like there's something wrong and they can't get it right because their wardrobe is communicating a version of themselves that no longer exists. Maybe you've become more confident over the last few years, or indeed, maybe you've lost your confidence. But let's lean on the more positive side. Let's say you've become a more confident person over the last few years, but maybe your clothes still communicate caution, playing it safe. Maybe you've become more creative. You discovered this freedom and this creativity within yourself, but your clothes still say conformity. Maybe you've become more ambitious but your clothes say you're playing it small. And when there's a gap between identity and communication, something feels off. And this is why, the first thing somebody might do here is, I know what I'll do. I'll go shopping. Or I know what I'll do. I'll get a colour analysis. And that will fix everything. That won't fix everything because you're not clear on who it is you are and how to bring your wardrobe into a place of connection where there is self-congruity. And I'll hear this from my clients. I don't feel like myself. I don't recognize myself. I don't know who I am anymore. And that's usually the clue. There's a gap there between the clothes in the wardrobe and who you are. I would say with the prevalence of trends and the pressure to look up to date and not, oh, that's so last year and all this kind of rubbish. I think for that reason, if you're chasing trends, most people are not dressing according to who they actually are. They can't be. If everybody's dressing the same, most people are not going to feel good in those clothes. They're dressing according to who they have learned to be, or indeed who they have been told to be. The good girl, the practical one, the responsible one, the invisible one, the one who doesn't make a fuss, the one who doesn't stand out. But at some point, those identities may have served a purpose, but it never actually aligned with who you are. It served a purpose at the time. But is it still serving you now? Because every outfit communicates something. Even choosing not to choose communicates something. Going back to that talk, and maybe some of you were listening who were at that talk, but I put on my pink fluffy dressing gown in that talk. And I asked them, what am I communicating here? And they're like, well, maybe you're tired today, maybe you're off to bed, maybe you're just chilling, maybe you're sick. These were all things that I was communicating simply by putting on that pink dressing gown. So even if you don't try, you are communicating something. And I think style is probably one of the most overlooked forms of self-leadership. Not because clothes are important, but because identity is important. Every morning you have an opportunity to reinforce who you're becoming. Every time you buy something, you're voting for the person you are becoming. Every time you wear something that no longer feels right, you're communicating maybe who you used to be. And most people never think of style this way, but that's exactly why it matters. Here's another little experiment for you who is listening. Imagine a photographer takes a picture of you today, wearing the clothes that you're wearing. And then they show that photograph to a room of strangers. What assumptions will they make? Would you be happy with the story they created for you? What would surprise them if they got to know you? What parts of you are currently hidden? And what parts of you deserve greater visibility? So to finish up, to say that style, it's often dismissed as superficial. And I get that reaction when I'm talking to people and they ask me what I do. And, I say I'm, identity and style coach. And they're like, oh, so you go shopping? Yeah, a bit more than that. But communication is never superficial. It's so incredibly important. And style is communication. It is one of the fastest forms of nonverbal communication available to us. And we can use it as a tool to work for us, or it can work against us. So the question isn't whether your clothes are communicating. They are. You can be sure they are. The question is whether they're communicating the truth about who you are. Are they truly reflecting who you are today? Or are they telling an old story that you've outgrown? Or maybe a story that was never yours in the first place? And maybe that's something worth thinking about the next time you get dressed. That's it for today. If you would like to apply to work with me to understand your identity, learn about what that looks like through an expression of your clothing and do it intentionally, then you can apply by booking a clarity call on my website. I'll leave the links below. You can also join my community, the Identity and Style House, and you'll find me on YouTube as well. I'll leave it there for today. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate it, preferably with 5 stars. That would be great. And maybe share it with somebody who you think might enjoy it. And I will speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye bye.